All right. So this was KitBusters for the 2021 season, taking structure kits to the next level. We didn't have too many updates this time, but we have, hopefully we'll make up in quality for what we lack in quantity. And if anyone has any they'd like to talk to us about after we're finished what we already have, please, we'll give you the floor so you can share what you're doing with us. So the first one, and we have Doug and Mike, they're going to talk about their O-scale diorama. So I'll flip the slides and you guys can to talk about what you're doing. So Mike or Doug?
Okay, I'm gonna start. Malcolm, go ahead and put the first slide up.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about the Bar Mills kit that we built. And then Mike is going to do an overview of the full diorama. I'm going to talk about how we built the scene, or how we arrived at the scene around this kit. Here's the finished kit. I built the basic structure, and then because you needed to be an octopus with 8 hands, Mike finished the roof off for me. We got a bit of a kick out of this because Mike found the lampshades in the box and figured I just didn't put them on, so he put them on, and then the two of us both laughed as we realized the scene predates electricity, so those came off.
Mike had a brain fart.
Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Okay,
for a second.
This is fairly early on. We set the kit on the overall diorama just to see how it was going to look and how it would be placed. And even though I had added a freight dock, a loading dock, it was clearly way too small to be a freight house. It just didn't fit. Next slide. Okay, so Mike starts built a couple of coal bins, and voila, we had a coal dealer, and that we called Walsh Coal and Drayage. And so the next slide. Okay, that scene, it was obviously unbalanced, and there wasn't the end closest to us needed something to fill in. So we got we had a gon that we filled with coal, and to move the coal from the gon over to the coal bin, we needed a crane or a bucket. Later in time, coal dealers would have used hoppers, but in this era, gons filled with coal were quite normal. So we got a crane, and we did a test run of it, and putting it on the end of the dock, and you can see that. Well, it's hard to see, but it did. The operator's hut of the crane got in the way of the gon. It touched the gon, so we had to do something about that. So the next slide. So the coal bins were moved to the front of the module. Little extension was built to the deck, and now the crane actually fit. So onward to the construction of the crane. The next slide. Okay, this is a Model Tech Studios kit, and building it was a little bit of a challenge because this kit is crude, and the construction or the instructions for the construction of the crane left a lot to be desired. Anyway, this is a view of the operator's hut on the crane, and we added a hit and miss engine. It's a gas engine, was in wide use at the turn of the 20th century for small applications like this. And so we built our own drive. The next slide, please. The crane really didn't have a drive system on it. It was kind of smoke and mirrors. So using pulleys and chains and belts and cabling, we devised our own drive system. And you can see some of the fabrication of it in this particular picture. And you'll see the 2 cables hanging down over the end of the crane down to the coal bin. So next slide. Okay, I found an HO clamshell, which seemed to be pretty much in keeping with the size of the gon, and Mike rigged it up. On the picture of the right, you can see Mike rigged it up to the end of the 2 cables, one to control the height of the clamshell, the other to open and close the actual clamshell to take the coal, let the coal in and out. And this shows the more or less completed scene, weathered a bit, and two men standing. They're kind of hidden by the clamshell bucket in this particular view, but presumably the teamster who drives the wagon and the operator of the crane are having a little chat before they load up the wagon.
And Doug, if I can interject, maybe there's a project for Daryl. Get that animation going, Daryl, to have that bucket work for us. Just teasing.
I like the idea.
Actually, the drive that we devised could probably be made to work, but I don't know if the Model Tech crane is up to handling that kind of, I don't think it's robust enough to handle that. Anyway,
if I can interject a second time, I did actually make the crane movable, swingable. That took a full afternoon's work, maybe 3 or 4 hours to really work on that pillar. And I put it on a little post, and you can swing the crane from the coal bin over to the ore wagon. But in order to get up to the gondola, we would have to lift the bucket. We didn't do that. I tried the bucket at the height where it would fit above the gondola, but I didn't like the look of it as much as having it lower down in the scene.
Well, the advantage of having a movable crane at this stage, even though we don't need it to move, was that it allowed us to put it at various positions to see what looked best. Anyway, that was a little expose on how we kind of finished the kit and the O-scale REA Bar Mills REA at Cranberry kit, and how we devised the scene around it. Still to come, there's signage, some more detail, and on the far side, on the far right of the building, we're planning a little repair scene for one of the Walsh's wagons that's broken down. Okay, over to you, Mike. Next slide, please.
Thanks. Before we go back to that slide for me, Mel, the first slide. Yeah. You see the horses have a shine on them. I had to put gloss coat on because after I finished the horses, I shared some of the images with our OVGRS group, our Garden Railroad group that operates at Fred Mills. And one of my friends in Toronto, John Laforestier, he rides and he trains these horses. And he said, Mike, those horses look so unhealthy. You've got to give them a shiny coat. A healthy horse has a shiny coat. So that's why they've got that little glossy appearance to them. Okay, go ahead, Mel. Sorry. So here's the overall diorama. You can see the machine shop with all those Sierra West scale models that Brett has put out, and they are phenomenal models, just beautiful. This is O scale, by the way. And Doug asked me to finish. He had built a couple of the machines, as you know, and he asked me to finish them up for him, which I did. And then we got talking. Well, of course, they need a home. So then why not scratch build a machine shop with all the intricacies of the belt drives and the drive shafts? And once we had the building complete, well, we need a water tower to feed the boiler, to feed the engine, to feed the machines. So it morphed into a diorama. Then I said to Doug, what would the town be like in the 1910, 1920 period? And he explained it to me. And then we said, let's build the town. So you've got the machine shop on one module. In behind, you've got the late Peter Nesbitt's beautiful depot that Peter built, and we bought it from his estate. Off in the top corner, you've got the Blair line general store. It looks very white. It's actually weathered, but you don't pick it up in that image. And then we've got the coal dealership with the Bar Mills REA Cranberry Depot on the right-hand side. Next, Mel. And here's a look from the other angle. I was a little hesitant to weather that coal dealership as Doug wanted it to be. He said, Mike, it's got to look like industrial England. It's got to look dirty. So I dirtied up everything, even that ore wagon that I love so much. It had to look really weathered. And if you notice the roof on the freight house, this side of the freight house, the roof has tons of coal on it. On the other side, you don't see the coal dust as much. Okay, go ahead, Mel. So I'm going to take you on a 2-picture tour of each of the dioramas or each of the modules. The machine shop, we chose to leave the front side open, and we chose to leave the front roof off so you can see all the interior details. You've got the REA, the box truck, just in the dock behind the fence. You got a gentleman on one of his buggies heading out of town. Those were Berkshire Valley models, just phenomenal kits. And next slide there, Mel. And in back, you've got the welding scene that Doug wanted. And this was the Woodland Scenics Welders kit, a great little kit. One problem. I got all the welders glued onto the scene. I've got their acetylene torches and that. And they gave a little finicky wire as a cable. Try and bend that up to glue onto the top fit of the acetylene torch and into the gun for the actual operators. Couldn't do it. Problems are opportunities for solutions. So I went into my staging room where I have a whole bunch of things stored and tools, got out some solder, or solder as Peter Cunningham says. Solder is malleable. I painted it black and I was able to bend it with ease to go exactly where I wanted it to go. Next scene now. And here's Peter's beautiful work. Man, was he Peter Nesbitt, an amazing modeler, and he had a great layout on the go. Peter left us far too early. And the only changes I made, I had to remove some figures that Peter had on that were far too late in the year. They were more 50s, 60s, 70s style. And next picture, Mel. And then Doug created the sign. We call it the town of Tyrone. And we had every one of those train stations in the past. Well, oftentimes the railroad family would live in the station and they would have a garden. The garden might be a vegetable garden to support the family at the dinner tables. It might be just a garden of perennials. But we decided to put an evergreen tree that in the wintertime is lit up with lights to welcome any visitor to the town of Tyrone. So that area is pretty immaculate. So next, ML. Here's that Blair Line General Store. The checkers players are Woodland Scenics models, but the banjo pickers on the rocking chairs are laser cut that Doug ordered. And Doug could tell me the company where he ordered them. I really enjoyed that because we got the music scene. And we'll definitely, Daryl, have to get a tune coming out underneath the layout from a speaker, whatever tune they're playing. And we added a little elevation because this is southern eastern Ontario, not much elevation. We put a bunch of trees up on a little elevated place in back. Next, Mel.
Mike, those banjo players are mini prints.
Mini prints. Okay, thank you, Doug. Yeah. And then here we have another Berkshire Valley farm wagon with the farmer heading out of town. He's got his milk jugs in tow. And I made that before I had the module to build it on. So I put it on a sheet of styrene on a little piece of plywood. And I thought I was going to have a dickens of a time removing that and putting it on the module because of all the strapping and the harnessing between the farmer and the horses in the wagon. But really, I just got my razor blade out and just chiseled it off the stand I had, and it fit quite lovely on the module. So I was quite pleased. I didn't do too much damage to it. Next, Mel. And here's a similar scene from a different angle, and you've got the horse at the station with the buckboard wagon. So these are all early 1900 vehicles. They're just glorious to model. In an O scale, you can get that beautiful detail. Next. And of course, here we are where we've spoken to this scene already. So you can go to the next one, Mel. This is the LaBelle gondola that Doug had asked me to build. We discussed we needed a freight shed. We needed a little team track. Do we put a box car or a gon? And we felt the gon would suit the purposes. And it's really from the purchase of that gon that we decided to go to the coal dealership. That kit was 60 years old. And I told you in a previous clinic I gave on it, my biggest concern was the actual decals. I wasn't sure if they'd be up to stuff. And sure enough, when I applied them and rubbed them on, the dry erase decals there, some of them were damaged. But really just a little touch up of the off-white paint fixed that up nicely. And you don't see much beside the track there, but later on I added a lot of texture to the landscape that Doug wanted. Last picture, Mel. And here's the area. Last little bit, we're still waiting for a few items to come in that are on order. And where you see that little crane there on the lower platform, that was all scratch built, by the way. And that's where we're going to have a wagon repair shop. And you can see where by the track, I put a bunch of texturing to the scenery. One thing I may do is I may paint, you do see the black of the side of the module slightly peeking through. So what I may do for Doug is I may just add a little bit of ground foam down the side of the module, and that'll eliminate that. You won't notice the division between the two. I'll be bringing all these four out to Ovar's meeting May 10th, where I'm the guest presenter of all things. So I'll have a lot of fun bringing this out. And I just today pretty much completed the Tidewater Wharf diorama in HO scale. I'll bring that as well. Those were 4 structures, but they all ended up on one module. So thank you for your patience, folks. Thanks, Mal.
Yeah, Mike, you guys are lucky, or that town's lucky it had that crane for the clamshell, because I believe that most coal was delivered by shovel out of gondolas in that
Quite
era.
possibly.
And a lot of shoveling, cheap labor. And certainly CPR delivered coal to local coal dealers that were next to grain elevators and on the prairies, and also in New Brunswick in boxcars. And they used kind of a scoop to all manually done, scooped out into a bin that was at the level of the hole in the bin was level of the floor of the boxcar. So
Malcolm, call it artistic license. It probably would have been hand shoveled, but we needed something on the end of the loading dock to make it look put the scene in balance. So that's why the crane got introduced.
That's our story, and we're sticking with it. Hey, Doug.
It's a beautiful crane.
actually, the thinking there, I have a picture from, it's actually from down in the Maritimes of the CPR in I think it's it's in Norton or Chipman, where they were coaling those little 440s, and they had a crane that looked something like this, and they used buckets. Now the buckets were hand filled by shovel, then they were used to fill the tender, and that scene was in my mind when we worked on the crane.
Yeah, they had several of those rigs. They're like actually just a hoist with an arm on it. They had one in Maniwaki, they had one at Teeswater, one down at Prescott, I think. And
yeah, those derrick cranes were actually quite common.
Yeah.
Daryl mentioned the figures in England. Daryl, I heard you mention, and we considered it, but Doug told me the cost. I mean, he's paying for this. I'm just building the models as a favor to him, but the cost was quite prohibitive, Doug. I recall for one of those figures from England. They were pewter, I think.
Yes, they were beautiful figures, but very, very expensive, and including shipping, it was just prohibitive.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll convince our colleagues who work at Interaction Hobbies or at Mini Prints to produce some turn of the century stuff for us.
I was going to say, just interject quickly. There's another company in the States that bought their HO stuff, is Knuckle Duster. I'll put the link on here. They create some Western and the turn of the century stuff that looks quite convincing. And
would that be O scale too, though, Daryl?
Yeah, they do HO and O scale and 28 millimeter size as well. So I'll put the link here in the chat.
Thanks so much, Daryl. It's great.
Beautiful work, guys. So is there a plan for the module other than
not directly? The as you know, I work in the garden in 1/20th scale, and I have an HO layout, but it is, Mike and I both agreed after working on this that it is really quite a lot of fun to work in O scale. It's big enough to see the details, big enough to work with, and we had a lot of fun with it. We may expand it because the basic industry in Eastern Ontario at that time, pre-First World War, was cheese. Cheese was exported to the UK, and it was a basic industry in all the little towns. They all had cheese factories. So one of the thoughts in our mind is to have a go at maybe adding a cheese factory to this. But beyond that, I don't have a specific plan to incorporate it into a layout or anything. It's essentially a standalone diorama.
And Doug, you worked in a machine shop when you were going through college, did you not?
Yeah, yes, I did. But it was by that time there was electricity, and they didn't have a belt drive system. But I have seen a few belt drive systems in my time, but they're not very common now, of course.
Great.
And
So-
thanks to Daryl for sending that link, Daryl. I'll let you take over, Mel.
Okay, so I don't think Norm is actually with us. So he asked me to talk about what he'd been doing. So he, in Norm fashion, he said he got sidetracked literally on building switches for the Algonquin pulp and paper mill complex on his layout. And he built a couple of paper structures to assess the freight shed designs. So he's been doing a lot of fast track work. So near us, we have a number 6 left-hand curved with a 24 inner and a 36 outer inch radius. And then we have a number 12 left-hand curved 24 and 28.5 inch radius. Those are beautiful. And these were built at the workbench using fast track templates. So the 24 inch radius leads to the wood chip unloader track. For those familiar with Norm's Nord Railway. So here's some more. Near us, we have a number 12 left-hand curved 24 and 28 inch radius. And behind a pair of number 6 curved 30 and 50 inch radius, built as one set, yet to be fitted with wood ties. The upstream number 6 leads to the paper warehouse. So here we have 2 number 6s, 30 and 50, now fitted with wood ties. And the paper warehouse extends past the wall, I guess here, under the stairs. There are 2 loading tracks, right and center, and a utility track on the left, each capable of holding 4 50-foot boxcars. So these are the switches to the paper warehouse, a number 4 Y switch here, and a number 5 right-hand, customized under construction at the workbench. All frogs are pre-wired for powering. Guess there's some wires going in here. So next part of what he wanted to talk about is freight shed design. So he was trying out a couple of different paper models to see what would fit nicely. So this is the pinkish color building here is the first one he tried. He didn't really like the hip roof, and it shows that he needs more real estate because this freight shed is actually backing up right against the cliff. So through the magic of model railroading, the cliff can be removed and pushed back. So here's another design. It's longer and better suited to what he wanted. And it taught him a few things. One, when you have a large roof overhang like that, you hide the front when viewed by operators. And so he thinks likely the final design will be as long as this, as high as the red shed, but with a shallower roof angles. The jury is still out about detailing the backside of it. And that is it from Norm. I can't answer any questions, but if you have questions for Norm, you can know where to find him probably. So next up, we have Grant, who's going to talk about the Como oil shed. Grant?
Good morning. Okay, next slide. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't look like a Como oil shed to me.
No. Does that?
That's okay. You're getting ahead of yourself, Malcolm.
No, I just wondered if what you were looking for is in a different place. So
Well,
he didn't. Oh, he probably forgot to update the title, I imagine.
That's okay. That's okay. The oil shed structure was actually a builders and scale kit I've had for many, 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 many years. I forget how many decades. And I modified it. It actually gets gas, I think is what the kit was labeled as. It's modified for my Como yard, becoming an oil warehouse. But I finished that a while ago, so I think we talked about that probably at our last KitBusters meeting, so that's probably where the title came from.
Yeah, I think so.
This building is another kit by a company called Rags to Riches, who is located in upstate New York, and the gentleman's now retired now, so these kits are no longer quote available, I guess you could say. This kit was made for the Aladdin General Store, And it was actually, it's based on a true prototype. The main structure of the building is in the center there, the two-story portion. And over time, there's a wing added to the left and another wing added to the right. And there's actually more extensions out the back of the building as well. And the kit is quite large and quite complex and very well detailed, very well designed and engineered. But it was too big for the spot I had in my layout. So I decided to forego the extension on the right and also extension on the back. So I just got the basic structure in the middle and the wing on the left. Now the building's not finished yet, and I'm in progress with it right now. So I'm busy putting the shingles on the roof and corrugated siding on the wing on the left, and then it'll have all the necessary details to go on the front platform. There's a gas pump that goes on the left, and of course there'll be signage to go on, which will all bring it to life. With big windows at the front, I'm going to do some detailed interior, and I'll put some lights inside as well, so you can see that to add some more interest to the scene. Okay, so that's that structure. Next slide. Okay. Now this is an interesting one, Daryl. There's a gentleman in town here that runs a hobby business called Leadville Designs, run by a gentleman by the name of Bill Meredith. And he specializes in, he calls himself boutique model supplier, largely focusing on narrow gauge in the United States area. I myself model the Colorado Railroad, which is a narrow gauge railroad that went into the Colorado mountains from Denver. One of his destination points was a town called Central City, which at one time used to be the richest square mile in the world. That was before the silver boom bust of the late 1800s. But in that town, this railway had two buildings, two brick buildings. The one on the left is a section house, and the one on the right is a ticket office. Eventually, they built a formal station in town, which was located to the right of this picture here, but I didn't have the space for it, so I thought I'd stick with the original two buildings. There's no commercial kits made for these structures, and my plan was to scratch build them. And I think for the last 25 years, I've had cardboard mock-ups on my layout depicting where these buildings are going to go and what they're going to look like. And Bill came along and he offered to manufacture these kits for me. So the walls of these buildings are the MDF board, and they're being laser etched with the brick pattern on it. I think Bill tells me it takes about half an hour just to etch one of these panels, etch the wall panels for the building. It takes quite a long time on the laser to build these things. But the models went together very nicely. Those are laser cut shingles that Bill also includes with his kit as well. And he did the windows, etc. So it worked out really nicely for me. The section house on the left has a corner knocked off of the building there to actually clear the railway track in the prototype. The building was so close to the railway track that they had to knock the corner off the building in order to get the trains by, to clear them. So I still have yet to put lights in the buildings and add the scenery around them, but that's fundamentally where they're going to go on the layout. Okay, next. This is a 120 scale way car, or caboose, as some people may call it, or bobber. The regional railroad that Colorado Southern was amalgamated from was the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railway. This kit was made by a company called Hartford. Just Hartford, I think. It's a laser cut wood structure model with white metal castings for all the brake rigging and the handle railings and all that type of stuff. And actually came with a detailed interior, etc. I've always wanted one of these, but could never find them because, once again, this gentleman's business closed down a while ago. But this one came up in an estate sale. So I jumped at the opportunity to pick it up. These things are quite expensive otherwise, but fortunately it was more in my price range when it was on estate sale. But I got the kit. All the detail parts had been unpackaged and painted to some extent. And as I went rifling through the kit, I soon discovered that I had white metal parts from a reefer refrigerator car, a Tiffany reefer refrigerator car as well. So this gentleman, it appears, had a number of railway car kits, and he took all the white metal parts from all of them, put them together, painted them all. And then I think after he passed away, somebody had to sort all this out. And that's why I ended up with the parts from the refrigerator car in with the caboose. Now, that being said, I was missing parts for the caboose. I was missing the doors, I was missing the windows, which are all laser cut pieces of wood. So those I had to scratch build to put back in the car. So this has been a project I've been working on and off for the last, I think, year and a half or so. I finally got it finished. The interesting thing is, I don't have a picture in this deck, but I'll provide the picture for the convention. But underneath, the brake rigging's all there, the suspension's all there, and it all works. So you can actually crank the brakes on, you can, the wheels will actually go over a bumpy track and all that type of stuff. So it's really neat from that perspective. I've made the roof removable so you can see inside where we got a couple of bunks, a table, a wood stove, and a bin, and a closet as well. So it's very detailed. And I have to admit, Doug, that this is not something I'm going to run the garden railroad outside because I think it's too fragile for that. I may do a special run, but I won't use it for normal operations. Okay, next. Oh, sorry.
What happened there? There we
You're
go.
welcome. Yeah, so that's just a view of the underneath of the car. So you can see all the brake rigging in there, the brake shoes, the brake beams. There's no automatic brakes on this car. It's all manual. So there's no brake cylinder on it or no brake line as well, from that perspective. But the springs on the suspension, as you can see, they're little silver spiral pieces. They actually work, and you push down on one set of wheels at one end, the other set of wheels compensate for it from that perspective. So it's pretty neat. And you can see the interior detail of the car as well. Actually, in fact, the stove for the kit was actually missing, so I'm on the lookout for a 120 scale wood stove that I can put in the car as well. Okay, next.
That's it.
Okay.
For a minute there, I must have missed the fact you were talking about 120th scale. I thought you were talking about your HON3.
I got HON3.
It is working great. Wow.
I got HON3 weight cars as well, but they're a lot smaller. That model is about 14 inches long.
Yeah.
It's actually quite sizable.
I was really impressed with working brakes on HON3.
I'm not that anal.
No. Okay. I don't think, I think this is left over from before, John Litterson's Roundhouse. I don't believe he's with us this morning, and we don't have anything to say about that. Were there any questions for Grant before we move on? I hear silence. Okay. That's great modeling, Grant, as usual.
Thank you.
I think that's just cicadas in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, given where it is. So I'm going to switch to a different deck for this. Share screen. Okay. There. So I got distracted between February and now on building that little line shed with all the stuff inside it. So a few weeks ago, I said, well, I better get back to this so I can have something to show. So what I was working on way back when is this Foscale building. It's called a type foundry. I'm not going to use it for that, but and I've mostly been working on the big, only been working on the big stone mill building so far. These are stock photos. They're not, I haven't got this far yet. So my thinking was I was going to put a nice interior in this. It's a hydrocal casting for the main building. I realized if I was going to have an interior, I need to do something about the bare plaster walls inside, and where there should be bricked in windows and should be doors visible inside, there was nothing. There were just blank walls. Also, I wanted to be able to support a floor with joists and so on. So I needed something for the floor joist to sit on. It can't just be suspended in midair. So for the first problem, I created the doors and bricked in windows by photographing the outside of the structure and then printing them on cardstock to scale so I could use on the inside. And my idea when I last reported on this was to add interior walls of 1/8 inch foam core and cut the holes for all the windows and doors and so on. Well, I started back on that, and I decided that I really didn't like the way the foam core turned out when you cut it. I'm cutting it by hand, so kind of left furry edges around the cuts, and you can't really sand foam core very well or file it. It just kind of goes fuzzy. So I wanted sharper edges. So I decided to start again and cut all the pieces from 3/8 inch basswood. So this is what it looked like with the foam core kind of mock-up, and you can see you get kind of rough edges and so on. But this is where I'm aiming for. This is the floor, and I'll show you the underside of that. It's a basswood sheet that's scribed and stained. And so these interior walls on the lower level are supporting the floor. So the joists are sitting on top of the lower level foam core. And this is kind of where I mocked up how it would look with the bricked in windows. And there will be a staircase down to the main floor. I have that purchased. I'm not going to make it. So this is the floor. And so this was stained with ink mixture, and then used weathering pencils to mark off the boards in the floor. These are long old hardwood floorboards. And then mostly what I did since last time was I finished staining the whole bottom of all the joists and so on. And I have a floating joist here, so it needs pillars on the bottom between the ground and the bottom of the first floor to hold this up. And then these will be, the ends of the joists will really be supported by the stone walls inside. So my first thought was, oh, I could probably use, I heard about AK concrete mix, and I thought, oh, maybe that would be interesting to use for the bottom floor, which would be cement or concrete, and maybe for the walls. So I have some, and I tried it out. You put this on with a spatula over, this is a piece of styrene, and this is a piece of basswood over here. You can spread it out fairly thinly. I used just a piece of cardstock as my spatula. And here's a sample of what it looks like. And you kind of can tell from the 1-inch grid here that these are pretty coarse. And so it might do for a rough concrete road in maybe O scale, or a retaining wall with very rough kind of parging on it in HO. But it wasn't going to work for a floor or parged walls in HO scale. So I needed a plan B. So my plan B was these are all the walls and the end walls for both floors. So I cut them out in 3 32 inch basswood. This is where I started thinking about a laser cutter, because all these are cut with a hobby knife, which gets really tedious, and it's difficult to replicate them exactly. But I persevered, and I thought I would, I supported these with little wires underneath and painted both sides at the same time with Tamiya fine surface gray primer. It's really made for plastics and metals, but it worked well for this as well. And it did not warp at all when I did that. I was afraid I'd used some of this wood before, and it starts to slowly warp even when it's weighted down when I put the inks on it for the other floor. So after the primer was on, I sanded it smooth with fine sandpaper. Then I used this polyfilla spackling compound, which is very fine. I used it for mortar before, and used it to fill in the grain, and then did another layer of sanding. And then I painted, these aren't painted yet in this picture, but painted it by dabbing a fine sponge in light gray craft paint. The craft paint has an advantage, is it's thicker. It's not like Vallejo paints where they're nice fine pigment. This is like dollar store craft paint. So now the grain, you can see the grain is gone here, and I've got a nice stippled look that looks more like parging on the wall. So I was happy with that. And then it looked a little too clean, so I got out my weathering powders and dusted it with dark gray weathering powders, and added more around the door where there'd be more action. So I did this with all of the pieces, It's actually not as dark as it looks in this picture. It depends very much on the lighting. So I did that with all the walls. Now, the other thing I needed was a floor because the building is not like the interior floor is not at ground level. There's a ramp up into the building. So I needed something that was fairly sturdy, and I wanted it to be removable. So this is probably overkill, but I made 80 thou styrene little box. This is the bottom side of it, and this is the top side. It's notched because I have reinforcing wood in the corners of my foundry building plaster to reinforce the plaster joints. So this floor is removable from the bottom so that I can put things out on here, and I can put the staircase in place and put the lighting in place, and the roof will be coming off from the top. So I'm going to hold it. I have some really tiny super magnets. They're 1 millimeter by 2 millimeter. So they're very small, and I'll be putting them probably on a couple of spots on maybe only one on each end, maybe two on each end, to hold the floor into the building. So when you pick it up, it doesn't fall out. So I did this similar kind of thing to get my concrete look. So I primed it with Tamiya primer, and then I didn't have to do all the sanding stages, of course. Painted it by dabbing a fine sponge. And I use these makeup sponges you can buy in Shoppers Drug Mart. They look like little wedges, and they're nice for HO scale kind of effects. So I used the light gray craft paint again, and then that was a little too pristine looking. So I dusted it with brown and dark gray weathering powders to get what we see on the right-hand side. So there's doors, a door here, and a door here. So those are a little bit dirtier. And I can always, since the floor comes out, I can always add some more if I like later. So I'd mentioned the interior walls were blank inside, so I needed to replicate the doors coming into the interior and the bricked in windows. So I took pictures and I printed on cardstock. This is 100-pound cardstock, which is pretty thick stuff, but it would still go through my inkjet printer. And I fixed the printout so they wouldn't be too susceptible to any water droplets on them, because the ink runs pretty easily. So I used it was an acrylic varnish sprayed on with an airbrush. Seemed to work. And I wanted to give them some three-dimensional effect, so I cut out these pieces, and they're overlaid on top of the background. And I noticed there's one little catch, that one of the doors is only a single door, so I had to make a mirror image of that, so it'd be the handles are on the right side when you look at it from the inside. The other doors were symmetrical, so it wasn't a problem. Then I did a similar thing with the bricks. This is the photo of the outside printed to scale on 100-pound cardstock. And then I scribed the mortar lines for the bricks to give it a 3D kind of effect. So then I started putting things together late last night. So here only one wall is glued in place so far. These are just sitting in place. But the brick and the doors are glued behind the basswood pieces. And so where I do it, I put everything roughly assembled with the floor underneath supporting the wooden floor, and the walls underneath supporting this wooden floor. Then everything's held more or less in place, so I can clamp it around the edges here to hold these in place nicely. Then once they're in place, I can flip it over and they hold the wooden floor in place, and I can clamp from the bottom without the styrene floor in place. So I noticed earlier on that I was going to have a problem here because the plaster casting is kind of rough around the windows. And so you can't get a nice tight joint at the basswood against the plaster. So I have made little styrene strips that are painted and ready to be cut to put window casing around the windows on the inside to cover those up. So that's about where I am now. I still have to do the roof support. The roof is not made to be removed, so you have to create some support structure for it so it can be removed, and put some trusses on the bottom of it, and then tar paper the roof, and install the staircase and railings. I've got the Tichy industrial stairs I plan to use, and then install the interior and the lighting. And so for the interior, I bought some of Daryl's machine tools. He has a detail kit that's laser cut wood, where you glue together several pieces of wood to get the thickness of the parts. And there's lathes and milling machines and drill presses and tables and so on. So that'll be installed on the first floor where the heavy machines will go, and I'll have some lighter things going on the upper floor. And then there's all the other attached outbuildings to do yet. So I've got lots to do yet.